This is Robert Merdlacci of the MindShare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. Happy St. Paddy's Day and welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech MindShare TV live podcast. I'm honored to have join me for a MindShare Learning Moment Dr. Benjamin Freud, who is the co-founder of Coconut Thinking, on the UNESCO published commentary on the Future of Education report as part of their Ideas Lab. UNESCO recently published this document, and we're looking forward to having a conversation with Dr. Freud. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All the way from Thailand, I understand.
Yeah, I'm usually in Chiang Mai, but today I'm in Phuket, so my life is pretty good.
Amazing. A little bit about Dr. Freud. He is the co-founder of Coconut Thinking, as I mentioned, which creates learning experiences that emerge from one ethical question: how do our actions contribute to thriving of the bio-collective? Ben's passion is creating learning and action experiences where all learners have a common purpose, positive impact on welfare of the bio-collective and anything living, sentiment, or plant that has an interest in the helpfulness of the planet. He'll be speaking at the upcoming World Education Summit, of which we're a media partner, March 21st to the 24th. And talk to me about what inspired your thinking around the recent blog response to the Future of Education report from UNESCO. There's been a lot of reporting lately around the future, given the pandemic, that was quite an accelerator for education and innovation.
Yeah, and the Future of Education report, really, it's something that comes out every 25 years, so it's quite a seminal report. It's a big deal, and they talk to over 1 million people across the world, parents and kids and business leaders and educators, and a lot of people to come together to come up with this report based on UNESCO. And this is in the tradition of Jacques Delors, who had one of the first reports, and he as the architect of Europe. There's just a lot of weight here. So on the Coconut Thinking blog, we've had quite a big journey, actually, because we started off being more student-centered learning, personalized learning, and all that, which is wonderful. But my wife is doing a PhD in thinking about ways of bringing animals and nature closer to kids' learning experiences, and she's been a real big influence on me. And mostly lately, the blog and the podcast have been about moving away from anthropocentric ways of looking at the world, that is, human-centered ways of looking at the world, and realizing our connections to nature, the fact that we are nature. And so, as someone who's very curious, I've been, getting into ancient wisdoms, Buddhism, Taoism, and also quantum mechanics. And I have to say, I don't understand any of it, but it's really cool and it's interesting. So there's enough there to keep me going. And so Noah Sobe, who's one of the authors of the report, he was on our podcast, and we just have a closer and closer relationship. And he invited me to make a commentary based on a few blogs that I'd written previously. And so what inspired me about the report is this idea of the futures, the shared understanding of futures. And so many times in the press and the media everywhere, we talk about the future of education. But I'm really thinking about this commentary in terms of the futures, because there's not one future. Everything is localized to who we are as individuals, but also as communities. And so it's this idea that we actually all have one different story to tell. We have stories to tell based on our context. And that goes back again to this idea of, it's a living systems framework, that we are wholes in ourselves. We have to think about where we're going. My story is my own. My community story is its own. And our species story is its own. And life story is its own. But as we work towards these nested wholes, we have to think about the different futures that we all have. So that's where it came from. It's this idea that really there's been a lot of fanfare around the release of the report. But unfortunately, I think COVID has attenuated that and muffled it. But we're looking at going back to this idea that there's not one future of education. There's an infinite futures of education, because we're all in ourselves different, and we need to do what's best for us, and then maybe that'll ripple out.
Fascinating. It is about context, and What intrigued me when we were talking off air in preparation for our conversation is the notion of curriculum of kindness that you talked
Mhm.
about. Perhaps you can share a
Yes.
little bit about that.
Sure. I'm very lucky. I'm presenting with Joanne McKeegan on a couple of things. With like she had she works a lot on contributive learning, and I proposed the curriculum of kindness. So since we knew each other and those were very similar, we're working together. And also, I'm doing another talk on portfolios of contribution or portfolios of kindness, whatever that title might be. And they're
Hmm.
both related. And it's the idea that really we have an education. It values, hierarchy, sorting kids. It values putting emphasis on reading and writing and math, which is amazing. Great, not really. It hasn't really worked. We've
Hmm.
got a lot of problems. Insert, whatever conversation you want here. But the idea is on the simple premise that learning actually doesn't mean anything unless there's action that's associated to it. And if
Fascinating.
you can know everything in your mind, if you don't do anything, then there's no point. My dissertation, for instance, was fantastic. I had a great time writing it, but nobody's really read it. Nobody's read it, so it hasn't had much impact in the world other than giving
Mm.
me joy. So it's this idea that it's not just about action; it's about the relationships. So we can act on the world, but unless we understand the relationships with ourselves and with other people, the learning and the action will be really hollow shells. So, can we work on changing the values of what we look at in education to make it so that it's about kindness? It's about doing things for others. And that's what we're going to be assessed on. That's what's important. Our actions towards others make the world a better place. And it elevates the conversation because then it's no longer atomistic, it's and individualistic. It's about togetherness. You and I are working on a project together to make the world a better place. And it's thinking about that social learning rather than individual learning for good.
Fascinating. Love your thinking, and it's really challenging my thinking, and there's a lot to unpack there. The social learning is incredibly powerful. We experience co-working and co-learning on a regular basis here. We've infused, you know, uh, co-op students, interns from both K to 12 and post-secondary higher ed, if you will. And it's that relationship. It's learning is an emotional process, and when the more you appeal to their senses. And 2 days ago, I interviewed Claudio Muca, an architect from Zebra in Denmark, who did a project here in Toronto, and he just released the Wise Journal, an ebook on learning and work in the future. And it's a interactive book, and I highly recommend it because it captures case studies from all over the world, and the environment is integrally important part of the success equation. In fact,
Yeah.
18% of the success of student success is attributable to the environment alone. A professor did research on, and those relationships that you talk about and the empathy is interesting. In kindness, it's all intertwined. We talked earlier. Finland teaches empathy throughout their entire education system, and it's no surprise that they're one of the top systems in the world. So, where have we gone wrong? This industrial model in North America and other parts of the world is still existing. And Dr. Steve Jordan's talked about the potential for the great snapback after all this innovation that occurred during the pandemic.
Yeah, and I think where we've gone wrong, and this is something that Oka Joshi Hansen writes about, and as do others, is going back to the scientific revolution about our separation from nature. Descartes, Bacon. I mean, Bacon said, let's torture the secrets of nature out of her, right? And the separation that we're away from nature, and that is a Western concept. And the fact that we've got the same education model throughout the world is a form of, I mean, it is coming from colonialism, and we're still to this day living this colonial mentality. But our separation from nature is the problem. Compartmentalizing, fragmenting, everything that makes it so that it's not just a relationship between you and me, it's a relationship with nature, relationship with animals, relationship with what we eat. All these things are fragmented. And so no wonder we live in a world where there's where there's such difficulty still to this day, even though we can do better, because we have lost our relationship. Now, I'm not going to pretend that there weren't difficulties before, granted, but
Right.
this is the first time in the history of the world, the first time that we could, if we wanted to, feed every single person in the world. And yet people are starving in Yemen, starving in Madagascar, starving in Sudan. There is starvation, and yet we could feed everyone in the world if we wanted to.
Hmm.
That's the first time.
But
It never happened before.
but you alluded earlier, it's about action, right?
Yeah, it's about action. Absolutely. And realizing our interconnectedness as a human species, but also, again, as part of the natural world. Your question of the snapback, it will snap back. There's no question in my mind. And the reason is because without realizing these connections that we have with the bigger world, that this living systems thinking, it will continue to be a meritocratic system that values quantitative scores, pieces of paper on the wall, competition, scarcity. It can't help but come back because education is so conservative. And they've been trying to change it since John Dewey. That's what, over 100 years, and it's still where it is. So I don't think anything's going to go back. I don't think anything's going to change fundamentally unless you reinvent it. And when I speak of the curriculum of kindness, I'm actually thinking that down the road, I'm going to ditch the word curriculum. I hate that word because it carries so
Hmm.
much baggage. Same thing with
Right.
school. Maybe ditch the word school. It carries too much baggage. As long as you say we have an innovative school, people are still thinking school. Let's call it something else. Let's call it, I know
Yeah.
Stephanie Marshall wants to call it, she calls it labs of imagination. Why don't we call it places of becoming? Something other than school, so we can write a new narrative with new words. Because if you write a new narrative with old words, it's just going to be an old narrative. And the snapback will happen because we still value the same things.
Well, and learning happens everywhere. The pandemic demonstrated that untapped potential, and the community is the school. Learning
Hmm.
happens here,
That's
everywhere
right.
we go. I mean, it's adopting a mindset, that growth mindset, that really you know should be taught. Learning to learn. I learned about a platform that does a Myers Briggs inventory of kids at an early age, and
Mhm.
then it allots them an animal that they closely can follow to help them chart their path. So it's a relatable experience. When I talked to Mark Prensky, who coined the phrase digital native, digital immigrant, just released a new book, and he's all about experiences.
Mhm.
We need to engage kids in real life experiences and build on that.
That's right.
So where do we go from here? What will you be sharing further? So you connected with Dwayne Matthews, another uh, podcaster and provocateur who is based in Canada. And
Yeah.
talk to me about the conversation you had around the metaverse. We studied when I was doing my Pepperdine master's degree in EdTech. We experienced Second Life 15 years
Mhm.
ago, and that was I guess the beginnings of the metaverse. That really it was ahead of its time. Let's say.
Sure. Sure. No, and Dwayne and I talked about the metaverse, and I want to say somebody else on the podcast that we had said something very simple, and I saw it with my kids. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I never
Yeah.
noticed that or thought about it. But then Vadichke said this is the first time that kids have realized the dream, which is to turn the volume down completely on their teachers. And we always wanted probably to do that in class, but now they can. So now that they can access anything in the world that they want, they can learn anything in the world and even speak to anyone in the world right now. As long as you have an email address, you can come in on 2D. With the metaverse, you'll come in on 3D, probably have a bodysuit where you can
Right.
have physical stimuli. So now we have a world that's completely open. We can talk to anyone and do anything and learn anything at any moment, anywhere. And that is fundamentally different than anything that's ever happened in human history, where we've always relied on other people to get us there. Even if you're calling on the telephone, unless it's a mobile phone, you have to want somebody to be in a certain location, but now you can contact anyone anywhere. At the same time, the environmental issues make it so that we have to keep everything local because we just can't handle the traffic that's going around. So we've got this double tension between the fact that our world virtually is infinitely connected, but we have to physically stay local. So that's going to be something that I think is going to play out. And I think that that tension is going to save us or break us. I'm thinking save us, frankly. And so, what does that look like? Those are the fundamental issues that we have, because the tech is only a tool. The big thing that we have to look at is how do we change a system to make sure the planet doesn't burn up. And tech will have to be a tool to get us there, not just the solution itself.
What I find fascinating about young people today is that when we were graduating, and I'm a baby boomer, I know I don't look like one, uh, tongue in cheek, we were looking for a job. It was a job. You just hoped to get it because there were so many baby boomers competing for jobs with that big bulge of population. But the young people I meet today, and I've never been more optimistic about the future because they want to make an impact.
That's right.
And I think that's from all the efforts that teachers are making, that parents are making, and helping them appreciate our world and what's important. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, we're embracing those in our Schools of the Future Challenge. The challenge kids to solve a real world problem within their community.
I'm
Thoughts?
gonna push the envelope here.
Yeah.
Just to kind of throw things out there as a possibility that really it's not I kind of, sustainable development goals bring us to fantastic places and move our thinking. I worry that this problem solution mentality is just going to exacerbate the problems and doesn't actually solve much. And we have to think about redesigning a system rather than going through a linear thing of, oh, we have a problem, let's solve it. Let's look at the system as a living system. How can we heal the system? And the SDGs are great. They get us talking, they get people thinking, they get action going. It's wonderful, but it's going to be, a milestone on a journey, because really we need to think about them not as goals, and we certainly don't need to think about them in terms of development. And it's more of a mindset. That sustainability, regeneration is a mindset. It's a process, and it never stops. And this idea of goals means that we're going to reach somewhere at a certain point and then we're good. But it's not that, right? And even the way they're organized, there's like 16 of them plus a 17th one thrown at the end. Only 3 of them deal with nature. Only 3 of them. And if we're not careful, it perpetuates a fragmented view of the world. We have quality education, zero hunger, economic development, whatever it is. And those things are all linked together. And it's really important, anyone dealing with the SDGs, to realize that they're all connected. And to realize also, and this is one that really I want to emphasize, that the one, number 4, quality education, the word nature doesn't come up once under quality education. Not once.
That's interesting.
So it's wonderful, great that it's having people talk, but we need to go towards more of a process and a mindset rather than a goal.
Fascinating. And so we had the Industrial Revolution of education. So what's the next revolution of education? I feel like we're on the cusp of it. We're in it. The pandemic is pushing the envelope. So what's next?
Well, educare, the word for education, means to bring out, right? And the industrial model has been more to fill. So it's been completely reversed. I'm just wondering, if the idea is just to, as someone who studied revolutions in school, things always come from the fringe. Revolutions don't happen at the core, otherwise they're not revolution, they're just changes. And those changes never really happen, in ways that are revolutionary. So on the fringe, I think it might come down to the fact that certain people, first of all, then certain schools and certain communities, kind of like a fractal, start to really write their own rules. And I'm not going to use the word innovate because I worry that innovation is still making something better. I'm wondering if it's a question of now reinventing everything, redesigning a system that has different values and just saying, you know what, we're going to do this. And then as these pockets show up, and this might be 10, 20, 50, 100 years if we have time, but as these
Right.
pockets show up, they network together. And then little by little, much like a little ball of mercury, they just become bigger and bigger and bigger, and then eventually get to critical mass. Nothing's going to change within the system. There's too many corporations who benefit from this from the capitalist system that creates these schools. There's too many people who don't who went through education to their values. It's too big. It can't change. But from the fringes, these pockets of schools that say, you know what, we're not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to value kindness, contribution. I mean, these are words that I'm using, but put in your other words here, but the same spirit, same
Right.
semantics. Kindness, social learning. We're going to value that. You do your thing, we'll do our thing. And that school over there is doing something a little bit different, but we're in the same tribe and we're going to work together. And then we're going to work, as you said, opening it up to the community. That's massively important because what you were saying about the baby boomers, well, they went to school for what, K to 12 and then an extra 4 years. But now people got to go to school until they retire.
Right. That
They have
notion
to,
of lifelong learning, right?
yeah, but they have to completely reinvent themselves because they might be replaced by a computer. So they always have to reskill. And they say that people are going to change careers 3-4 times in a few decades. So we're always going to go back to school. So then school can go from 5 to 75, 85, 95. And so they become places of becoming. No more schools, but places where we grow, we learn together with the community, bringing in artists, bringing in painters, bringing in plumbers, bringing in technicians, bringing in architects, and we're all together in a community of learning. And that is completely different. So it's no longer the word school that we use. And then little by little, much like your product, like the innovation hockey stick, eventually people will
Right.
come on to that. And then much like every product, maybe eventually it'll decline in a few centuries. Who knows? But it's just going to take that, just pockets coming together, early adopters, because we're not going to be able to change it from the inside.
One final question, Dr. Freud. What gives you hope for the future?
What gives me hope is conversations like this. It gives me a lot of hope. The fact that, again, technology has allowed me to just be able to talk to so many people across the world who feel the same way. And before, we were physically contained within our local communities, I guess, and the people that are there. But now there's a potential of millions of people that I could talk to about these things, and then we're able to connect and talk together. And it reminds me a little bit, when you join an organization or school at the beginning, it's okay just to come and say, "Hey, Robert, how's it going? I'm Benjamin," and it's socially okay. I feel like that's how it is right now across the world, where it's okay to say, "Hey,
Yeah.
I'd love to have a chat. Let's talk," and then connections are made. And people are going to come together like this, like-minded people, and those networks that I was talking about are going to happen much more easily because now we're used to it and we're okay with it, and people realize that need for change.
With that, thank you so much. Such an honor to speak with you today, Dr. Freud.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Robert.
That was Dr. Benjamin Freud, the co-founder of Coconut Thinking, who will be speaking at the upcoming World Education Summit, March 21st to 24th, online. My name is Robert Merdlanchi, the MindShare Learning Report. Be sure to check out www.mindshare.learning to get your latest issue. And until next time, stay healthy, stay safe, and keep the learning curve steep.